My first few miles and minutes of ownership were relatively painful. A couple of years I looked around and I had accumulated about 15 cars from shooting car trek and building different things and buying terrible examples of really cool cars, which is my favorite pastime. It had just gotten out of hand and I made the rash decision to list all of them for sale, partially to downsize and clear up some space, but also because I'd found the opportunity to buy a really terrible Bugatti Chiron. And so I sold, I think, 9 cars in the course of a week and got rid of some stuff that was really in the way that I really liked, but I just didn't have the time to drive. And unfortunately, the Bugatti deal never materialized, so I was sitting on some dry powder and it was time to buy something. And around that time, I was contacted by a German car dealer named Alex Hess, and he told me that he was trying to sell a US market Lamborghini Murcielago SV. And he was confused because the badge said it was 257 out of 350 cars, and my records on VINwiki that he had seen said that the car should be number 240 out of 350. So I explained what had happened with the car, that it had been in a terrible accident in 2016, and that I presumed it had been repaired in Europe and was now for sale. And so that must have been where the confusion happened. I knew a lot of the parts had been stolen off of the car while it was at the Copart lot, and so surely they just tried to order it, and the factory does not have records of which badge goes on which car. They must have just guessed that was in fact a black car that was down in Miami, and they put the wrong plaque on it. Now, he was trying to sell the car. Crash cars don't sell well in Europe, and US cars don't really sell that well in Europe. And so I knew this car was probably going to transact back of European values at the time, which already were considerably lower than US values for clean title, really good history SVs. So it seemed like it could be a deal, and in fact it was. So I made a deal on this car. We flew it to the US. I loved it. It was a spectacular car to behold, and for very justified reasons. The SV is looked at as the ultimate version of my favorite car, the Lamborghini Murcielago. Now, in all honesty, my real favorite Mercies are LP640 manual cars. There's about 100 of those worldwide compared to a little over 300 SVs, but at the end of the day, it is gorgeous. It has all the presence in the whole wide world, and it fit very nicely with my Verde Draco manual LP640 coupe, and the other car that I had bought in not buying the Bugatti, which was a Nero Nemesis matte black, terrible condition, spray painted exterior LP640 Roadster. Having all 3 Mercies felt like a very irresponsible version of a great idea, and I was immediately faced with a problem. As I unloaded the car off of the apparatus that they used to fly it across the ocean, it was barely going into gear because the brake light switch had failed, and that allows the car to know that it's okay to shift into first or reverse. That was an easy fix. But the bigger problem was that not long after I got home, I could barely walk. Now, the SV, as a default, comes with a one-piece, non-adjustable carbon fiber racing seat that sits a good bit higher than the standard comfort seats in an LP640, or what would have been a no-cost option to get the comfort seats in the same stitch pattern in Alcantara. But of course, very few of the cars came with those. It was very cool to have the carbon fiber racing seats, and that's what this car had. I'm 6'5". If I sit up straight in that car, my ear is against the roof. And so I do not fit in the car with the seats, and I was in tremendous pain. It boogered up my back driving at about 45 minutes an hour to get back to my house, struggling with the transmission and everything else. My first few miles and minutes of ownership were relatively painful, but I loved the car. I just took the seat out of it. I drove the car sitting on the ground, and I really liked it in that way. Obviously not very comfortable for long distance, but I knew I was going to have to figure out a solution for the seats in order to keep the car. Now, there's really 2 logical answers there. I could either get the comfort seats from Lamborghini, or I could have a custom seat made. But because of what the car was and the fact that US cars were already over $1 million by the time I'd gotten this thing home, that really didn't make an awful lot of sense to have a weird aftermarket seat in the car. And so I wanted to have the right seats because I do sort of fit with the comfort seats. Now, the problem there is I either buy some mismatched take-off seats from a crash car or whatever, or I order a set of new seats, which Lamborghini will still sell you. That was the right approach because a used set was going to be $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, a couple thousand more to upholster them, and then I've got something that's really not exactly as good as it could be, versus about 15 grand, but probably a year wait to get brand new ones from the factory. And that was also problematic because if I go through the process of ordering them, then I'm committing to wait with a car that's very uncomfortable in that amount of time. Now, of course, that's fine. I've got other Mercies to drive, but it just felt weird. Also, it's weird to have three of the same car. And I knew that, and I knew that if something big ever popped up, that was going to be the first Murci to go. And a few cars had popped up that I had tried to buy in deals that would have required this car leave, including the Bugatti Veyron Supersport, a Koenigsegg in Korea, some other things that I've chased over the last year or so. And nothing had really worked, and part of it was that this is not the most liquid car. It does have a rebuilt title now. It had a salvage title when it left, and that was a massive, like 40 hours of DMV visits problem to solve. But, it was not a top tier example. It was the only Rosso Andromeda car worldwide. It was one of 45 US SVs, one of 308 worldwide. And so I knew that it was never going to be an easy car to move, but I knew there was going to be a buyer. There always is someone who wants to own the cheapest example of a really cool car, and it's not always just me. A couple of months ago, I got contacted by Andrew Engelman, and he had recently started a boutique sports car and exotic car dealership, but he's also a huge Lamborghini enthusiast. Really, he's a huge enthusiast of drivers' cars, whether it's from Porsche, Ferrari, Lamborghini. He's got an STO, he had a couple of Scuds, he's got a bunch of GT3s and things like that in inventory because they're the cars that he honestly loves. And when car dealers take that approach and they buy the cars they love, they're better at selling them, they buy better versions of those cars, and they have an awful lot of fun. And so he told me that he wanted an SV. And at the time, there were two cars generally for sale. One was a Canadian market car that happened to have comfort seats that, quite honestly, I was in the process of trying to work a deal to either trade for just the interior or trade for the whole car, knowing that it had a little bit of paint work and would have been probably a fairly similar value car. And there was also a cleaner Grigio Telesto US car that had run on Bring a Trailer, got a pretty strong bid on it, but did not meet its reserve and it had not sold. And so I had access to the owners of both of those cars, and I started talking to him about what the options were. He really liked the white car, knowing that it was going to be kind of a below market price thing, having to bring the car in from Canada. It was kind of unique that it didn't have the interior carbon package that most of the US cars had, and certainly it was unique because it had comfort seats. Now, he didn't really like the comfort seats because he happens to be of a stature that fits into the carbon fiber racing seats, and so we started talking about maybe he's going to buy that car, maybe then we swap the interiors. It was a conversation. Now, that car ran on Cars and Bids and sold very abruptly for less than I knew the reserve to be. So apparently there was some behind the scenes negotiation that if you bid to this point, I'm going to pull the reserve and you're going to win the car. So rather than, as most of these auctions do, they take 30, 40 minutes as bids go up by $1,000 or $2,000, the bid jumps $200,000 in the course of a couple of minutes and the car is sold. So he was sad to have missed that car, but he really wanted an SV and he wanted to be around that price point. Now, the only other SV in America that would have met that was my car. And so that started the conversation of, well, do I just sell him mine? And I wasn't looking to buy anything in that moment. I'm always looking to buy something, but there was no defined target of what I might be replacing this car with. But I had sold, in the process of liquidating most of the car collection a couple of years ago, my 2009 Ferrari 430 Scuderia. And it was honestly the best car that I've ever owned in terms of usability, reliability, and just how much fun I had in the car. Now, I still love my Murcis, but I think that the best two-car garage ever is a Scud and a manual 640. So I missed the car. I had just kind of had all the adventures in it and wasn't just itching to drive it every time I went into the garage. And so I thought, he's got a couple of really nice Scuds in inventory. Maybe work out a deal where I use that as a partial trade and I pull most of the cash out of the SV. He loved that idea. We fairly quickly came to a deal. Of the cars in his inventory, the Scud that I landed on is a yellow one. I love Giallo Modena as a color on Ferraris. A lot of people don't like yellow Ferraris. Perhaps it's a bit garish, but even though I think the most beautiful color combination on Ferraris is gray with a red interior, like the CarTrek 599, like my last Scud, it's not the best for social media and visibility and all the things that I end up doing in the car, the rallies that I've taken it on. And so I love it in yellow, and this car is beautifully configured, in exceptional condition, and was just the perfect fit for me. He came down here, he and his co-founder of the dealership, Petco, told some great stories from this very chair, and ultimately they bought the car. Now, as drivers would to celebrate this purchase, we all decided to go on a mountain drive. So I took the 640 Roadster, they took the SV, we had another friend come along in a 640 Roadster, and just had a blast. They were very familiar with the roads of North Georgia. Andrew lives down in Orlando, and so this is where you come to drive a car the right way. So he'd been up here a bunch of times. But at the end of the day, they ended up becoming the owner of my red SV, ultimately for inventory in the sports car collection dealership, but significantly because it's just a car that he really wanted to own. And so it'll be very fun to watch as they help find the next owner of my SV, and I'm sure it will go to a great home. But ultimately, it was just the right time for me. If I'm going to focus on just putting miles on my manual LP640s, in fact, I need to put about 5,000 miles this year on my manual coupe in order to make it the highest mileage manual LP640 in the world. And again, the Roadster that I get to sit up straight in is honestly my favorite car ever built. There are certainly more significant cars, there are more valuable cars, but nothing puts a smile on my face like that. Even the SV, as great as it is. Now, of course, as soon as I shook his hand, as soon as I agreed to the deal, there was this deep down, like, did I make a massive mistake? Because just as he couldn't find another SV at that price point, I cannot afford to buy a much nicer version of an SV, which would be the only thing that I could find to replace it. So perhaps the idea of having every cool version of a Mercy may be behind me, but at the end of the day, I still have the cars I love. It's going to a great home, and it certainly has a great caretaker in the meantime. Now, of course, in trading for this 430 Scuderia and getting rid of the SV, I didn't find my Scud on Auto Tempest, and that is very unique because almost every other car in the garage did come by searching Auto Tempest each day. Whether it's on their mobile app or on their website that you can find the link in the description below, check them out now to thank them for their support of VINwiki and find your next car. They compile the listings from all the major sites into one place, making it faster, easier, and much more powerful than you could possibly imagine to find your dream car. So check them out now. Thank you.